I belong to the land in a way that I could never escape it. Like I could move to the other side of the world and change my name and change my complete identity. But my heritage, and my ancestral lineage, the way I was raised, I was always reminded that I belong to that particular land. There's nothing that can change that. And that was something that I don't think I wasn't very conscious of how much that has shaped me, but it's grounded me my entire life, because there is nowhere in the world, no situation in the world that has ever made me feel like I don't belong. And that is because I was raised with a cosmology and a belief from my ancestral lineage that I belong to the land.
Welcome to another episode of the Climate Conscious Podcast. I am your host, Derval Barzey. And today I am joined by Marion Atieno Osieyo. Hi, Marion.
Hi, Derval. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I am keeping so well, and I am very grateful for the opportunity to be with you today and the climate conscious community. So thank you for inviting me.
How does it feel to be on the other side of the podcast mic?
It feels interesting. Like I was super excited to connect with you. And yeah, it just feels exciting also because I feel that this is a space where we can learn so much together just by being in conversation. So I'm grateful to have the chance to be with you today.
Marion Atieno Osieyo is the creator and host of Blac Earth Podcast, an interview podcast celebrating nature and Black women environmental leaders. As a leader, Marion brings together strategy, storytelling, science, and contemplative spirituality to create solutions that promote human and ecological well-being. She has worked with a number of organizations, including WWF and the UNHCR Innovation Service, on the Sustainable Development Goals, nature conservation, and environmental justice. Of Luo heritage, Marion was born and raised in Nairobi, Kenya, and London, UK, where she currently resides. So, Marion, on the Blac Earth Podcast, you speak about reimagining the environmental movement, and that being about investing in Black women's earth care, not just our survival, but our creativity, our joy, our intelligence, and our dreams for the planet. And I just love that saying. I just love that quote from you, which I pulled from your trailer for season 2. So firstly, congrats on your second season.
Thank you. Thank you, Derval.
But tell us, what led you to create the Blac Earth Podcast, and what have you discovered along your journey?
Wow. So Blac Earth has been a journey of 3 years of creation. I thought of the idea in 2020, and it took me a moment just over 2 years to bring all the elements together, the idea, the stories, the narratives, and also, to find a great teammate, Anesu, who leads on our social media and content creation side. But essentially, I wanted to create a space where we could have informed, inspiring and authentic conversations about what it means to take care of our planet. I wanted to share the really exciting and inspiring kind of science and knowledge and understanding about the earth and what's happening in terms of like climate change and nature loss. But also I wanted to showcase the incredible solutions that are rooted in the diversity of cultures and experiences and relationships within the global Black community. And I wanted to look to people who I felt were, creating really progressive and world-changing solutions that actually worked when it comes to addressing issues around environmental injustice or nature loss. And those people happen to be Black women. Whenever I thought of, light bulb moments in my career or really pivotal, research or insights that I had read or come across, they happened to be, done by Black women. And so I wanted to create the space to share with the world that another world is possible, another future is possible, that is different from, the climate doom that is, for some of us, it's the reality. It's not a future, but it's our current reality. But I also wanted to share with people that there are solutions out there that work, that have been, developed and cultivated by amazing people with amazing life stories, and to really share that in a very joyful and authentic way, without running away from, the realities that a lot of people in the world are facing with regard to climate change. And so Blac Earth is really a manifestation of that. It's a podcast to celebrate nature, because, our living planet is such an inspiring and beautiful and cosmic being and place to be. And it's also, the podcast is about celebrating Black women leaders who are bringing the most effective solutions, informed by scientific knowledge, to heal and repair and restore our living planet. So that's how Blac Earth came about.
I must commend you on your persistence in bringing your vision to reality, having that idea in 2020, which is also when I got started with the Climate Conscious podcast. And I see so much alignment in terms of creating a space for, as you said, informed, inspiring, and authentic conversation around nature and environmental concerns. Representation matters, and it's important for us to see ourselves in the work that we do and in empowered positions. We're facing the climate crisis, we're facing environmental injustice and other forms of injustice, but we're not only victims, we are especially sources of solutions and part of creating change, and it's important to amplify those voices.
Absolutely, Derval. I totally agree with you. We are experts, we are leaders, we are creators. And, I don't know if this resonates with your experience, working in the environmental space and sustainability. But sometimes there can be a tendency for Black people to be kind of portrayed as, perpetual victims. And I feel that narrative really undermines just the amount of genius and creativity that we have shared and brought to the world with regard to our understanding of nature and how to take care of nature and how to live in harmony with nature. And so, yeah, it's really refreshing to be able to share these insights and to learn from, people who are first and foremost, aside from being, Black women, or people from the Caribbean region, with regard to your podcast, it's just first and foremost showcasing people who are experts and who have really, dedicated themselves and their efforts and their talents and their genius to understanding, how to make our planet a better place. And it's really an honor to be able to hold space for people like that and to learn from them, So yeah, I resonate with you on that. Representation matters, and the narratives and the stories that we tell ourselves, and allow other people to tell about us really does matter. And whenever we can, we should use our agency and our voice to tell stories that speak life into ourselves and into other people as well.
So, Marion, how has your upbringing in Kenya and the UK shaped your passion for sustainable development and your understanding of environmental justice?
Wow, that's a big question. So, yeah, just to give a brief context, you mentioned it in your intro. I'm Kenyan by heritage. I was born in Nairobi, Kenya. And I spent my childhood there, and then I moved to the UK when I was 10. And I've lived mainly in London for the past 20 years. And I think these two experiences they had such a profound experience on my life. Firstly, just being able to live in two different parts of the world that are quite different in a number of ways, that allowed me to embrace and understand that there is so much diversity in the human experience, and I think I've been able to hold that in the way I live my life, being able to understand and know that wherever I am in the world, there is someone who is having a completely different experience and understanding. And it's encouraged me to be very open-minded to different ideas and different perspectives, and to try and integrate them into a greater whole. So I just want to preface that. But with regard to sustainable development, I think there's so much that I draw on from my Kenyan heritage that shapes my understanding and love for nature. One of that being language. So English was not my first language. It was actually my third language. And both in my ancestral language of Luo and Swahili, they're different, nature is conceptualized in a different way. Sometimes nature is kind of referred to as a person and a being, as opposed to like an object. And we have different sayings and phrases which help to recognize kind of nature throughout our day. And so language has been, having a different language from English has helped me to think about and understand and see nature in a different way. And that has been very important in the work I do now, or part of my journey in this vocation of sustainable development and earth care is, understanding and seeing nature as a living being, as opposed to an object, which is very much how it's conceptualized, how nature is conceptualized in the English language. So I think Kenya has given me the gift of language and being able to think and see and imagine in a different language. And that has been, very fruitful for me in my journey now with regard to earth care. I think another thing that my Kenyan upbringing has gifted me was this profound understanding that I belong to the land. So, we have ancestral land, where my lineage is from back from many generations, are buried. But it's, where my ancestors are buried, where my lineage is from, it, has shaped, the color of my skin, the makeup of my my DNA, my body, the plants and the soils and the foods and the nature that was familiar to me. And so there's something that I find really sacred about that. And I belong to the land in a way that I could never escape it. Like I could move to the other side of the world and change my name and change my complete identity. But my heritage, and my ancestral lineage, the way I was raised, I was always reminded that I belong to that particular land. There's nothing that can change that. And that was something that I don't think I wasn't very conscious of how much that has shaped me, but it's grounded me my entire life, because there is nowhere in the world, no situation in the world that has ever made me feel like I don't belong. And that is because I was raised with a cosmology and a belief from my ancestral lineage that I belong to the land. And a third, I guess, an experience that I had when I was in Kenya, which has also had a profound impact on my life, was to do with water. So when I was 4 years old, I drank contaminated water, and I was really, really sick. I was actually in intensive care for nearly a year. And I mean, it was a profoundly traumatic experience. And for a majority of my life, I didn't really trust nature, which I think is something that it's hard to conceptualize unless you've experienced situations where you're living in an environment that is, has, for example, toxic levels of pollution, or, for example, maybe sea levels rising, living in an environment where, nature becomes a hazard and a danger means that you can never really fully trust, the environment. And that has a profound disconnect on your life, on your personhood. If you cannot trust nature, then essentially you cannot trust life. And so I think it's recently in some of my work, both through the podcast, but also outside the podcast, really connecting with people who have been affected by environmental injustice, and hearing the resonance in their stories of, how, those experiences they've had have led to a profound distrust in the world, in life and in nature. I think that experience when I drank contaminated water, I think that, that changed me for a while. But through my own journey, the past few years, really reconnecting with nature, spending more time on a personal level, but also through my work and my career, I've been able to kind of reconcile those experiences, and understand that it wasn't the water that was toxic. It was the poor governance and mismanagement of water systems that was really toxic. And so, I think those three experiences from my Kenyan upbringing have really shaped me. I think living in the UK has introduced me to the beauty of the experience of being part of the African diaspora, the Black diaspora, whichever terms you want to use. And I see and appreciate the real diversity of the Black experience. Derval, you and I are both Black women, but we have very different life experiences. And I think there is so much beauty in that. I think growing up in the UK has allowed me to embrace the diversity of Black cultures in a really rich and profound way. And I see, in addition to, being Black, but just diversity in general, I don't see difference as a point of conflict, but an opportunity for real connection and real real conciliation. So I think my UK experience has really allowed me to embrace that and pour that into my work when it comes to thinking about what sustainable development means in different contexts. And just finally, I also want to acknowledge that growing up in the UK, I've had the opportunity to study and understand, sustainable development on a deeper level, both through my kind of academic training, but also just in my work that I do now, both in the podcast, but also more broadly outside that, working on, policy and advocacy on sustainable development and nature conservation. And so I really appreciate the experiences and opportunities I've had to be able to apply myself in that way. And hopefully that will continue in the UK and beyond.
Well, Marion, you have shared so many great gems. Firstly, I have to thank you for sharing your personal story of resilience and your experience with environmental injustice.
Thank you.
And also highlighting the value and the beauty of diversity, the diversity of the human experience. And in this work that we're doing, in this space that we're involved in, I think important tools that we need to have are empathy, compassion, and open-mindedness. There's a danger of a single story. Part of having these conversations is about telling our own stories, telling multiple stories, and allowing persons to understand the nuances that exist and the different contexts that exist when it comes to sustainable development. It's never, one story. It's never a single issue. It's complex. It's multifaceted, and we need to approach it with that appreciation. The other thing that I love that you said is that sense of belonging, and growing up in Kenya with that understanding that I belong to the land. And I think this is something that we all can try to incorporate in our personal lives, a sense of belonging to the land. And then with that sense of belonging, then you understand it comes with a responsibility. And how you take on that responsibility, your decisions, your actions, your mindset, I think it changes when you stand in a position of belonging to the land and recognizing that other people belong, and we're all part of this bigger ecosystem.
Thank you, Derval. I really appreciate that. What I heard you say, how belonging comes with responsibility. I hadn't thought of it that way, but that really definitely resonates, at least with where I'm at in my own journey, when it comes to wanting and intending to be a better steward of nature.
Based on your personal experience and even your professional work, how would you define the concept of environmental justice?
I definitely would say that the work I've been doing over the past few years helped me to understand what that experience was of me drinking contaminated water, and how what environmental justice looks like in that situation, if that makes sense. So for me, environmental justice is about addressing the social, political, and economic drivers of inequality. Social groups in society are disproportionately harmed by changes in the natural environment. So whether it's climate change, whether it's pollution, whether it's contaminated water, they're more at risk of being affected by those changes in the natural environment because of the existing inequalities in society. And I feel that this term environmental justice is really important to remember and acknowledge, because there can be a tendency to separate the environment and the social/human experience. And so when people are studying the environment, for example, they may study changes in the climate or changes in water quality, but they don't necessarily look at the social element of that, like who is contributing to the changes in natural environment, who is being impacted, what are the drivers. And environmental justice is a concept that allows us to look at both of these issues together, the environmental changes and the social changes / drivers, to create a more holistic picture of what is happening and what the most effective solutions could look like. So that is how I, conceptualize or understand environmental justice to be. And within the context of environmental justice, justice can look like different things, right? So justice can be about distributional justice. So that essentially means that when it comes to, for example, an intervention that looks to safeguard nature or address climate change, the benefits arising from that intervention are proportionately shared between different social groups, taking into account the fact that, for example, one community may be contributing less or more to the drivers of, climate change. And so distributional justice is really about ensuring like a fair share of benefits and impacts are taken into account when trying to address changes in an environment. Justice can also look like procedural justice, so transparency and accountability in the way decisions and policies are made about a certain environment. So some of the issues that arise from environmental justice is that the groups who are being negatively harmed by certain environmental changes don't have, fair access to information, or they haven't been consulted meaningfully, or they haven't had an opportunity to actually, share their perspectives, share their opinions on how a certain, policy or a certain decision would affect them. So the justice really comes from ensuring, from a governance perspective, that the processes and procedures we have to make decisions about environmental management really taking into account different social groups and their need to be involved in those decisions. Justice can also look like recognition. So acknowledging, when I heard you say the danger of the single story, sometimes in environmental spaces, you can have one group's perspective or one group's insight shaping solutions and shaping, how things are being done. But justice really in terms of recognition is about acknowledging that we have a diversity of identities and cultures, within even our communities, we have certain institutions that shape how we relate to the environment and how we understand and use and experience the environment. Just to give an example, Derval, if you and I were to work on a project, we would have to take into account the fact that we have two different lived experiences. We have, we belong to a broader shared culture, but that has nuances, and taking into account those different identities and cultures is a really important part of whatever decision we'll come to regarding a certain, environment that we're looking to contribute to or develop solutions for. And then a final part of, I guess, justice and environmental justice concept is something that we call epistemic justice. This is really about acknowledging and valuing the different knowledge systems and the different sciences that contribute to humanity's understanding of the environment. So it's not about having a researcher or a scientist from this country, flying to another part of the world to research and share their, what they think a certain community needs. It's actually about looking into that particular community, understanding what, knowledge, what values, what belief systems they have created in their community to relate to that particular environment, and using that as well as any other information or science that might be relevant to help them develop solutions that are meaningful for them. So I think within the context of the environment and talking about, things like climate and nature conservation, epistemic justice is so important because so much of, research and science and knowledge is extracted from communities. It's extracted from people. It's extracted from nature without the involvement or the meaningful co-creation of those communities. And so an important part of environmental justice is acknowledging that, the communities, even and especially those who were disproportionately harmed by negative changes in the environment, do have knowledge, do have science, they do have wisdom, which is important to acknowledge and incorporate into whatever solution that is going to be developed going forward. So that's a brief, but a bit more in-depth overview of environmental justice. And I hope that makes sense, Derval, and is helpful to whoever's listening today. I also I wanted to add one more thing. So there's a concept of environmental justice, which I've shared now, but I also want to say that this term environmental justice came from lived experience. It came from the organizing of Black communities, indigenous communities in North America, in 70s, 80s, 90s, who came together to develop this term as a way of making sense of the disproportionate impacts of things like pollution in their communities. And if any of you have time, I'd really recommend if you Google or online, you can research the 17 principles of environmental justice. There was a summit held in North America in 1991, where a group of environmental leaders came together, people of color came together to develop the 17 principles of environmental justice. And that has shaped this concept since then. And I think it's important to also say that because there is a definition of environmental justice, which I have laid out, but there's also a historical meaning of environmental justice that came from the lived experience and the wisdom of our ancestors before us. And they gave meaning and they gave language to a term that is now really shaping climate discourse at every level, from local to international discourse. We're talking about climate justice. This all came from the work and the efforts of from Black people and people of color in North America. So I also want to acknowledge that, because I think within the context of our conversation and the work that we do, Derval, it's really important for us to remember and amplify and celebrate the science and the contributions that come from our community.
Thank you, Marion. Thank you so much for breaking down the concept of environmental justice. And I want to go deeper. I feel like we probably need a part 2 to this episode because there's so much to unpack.
Yeah.
That is sad. I mean, for so long, we have separated the environment from the human and the social experience. Even in my studies, when I graduated in 2010 from environmental management, there really wasn't a heavy emphasis placed on the social aspect of environmental management. But then when you enter the world of work, when you enter the real world as a practitioner, you cannot deny the connection and the influence of the social aspect of environmental management.
Yeah.
And also acknowledging diverse perspectives. And I think that is kind of core to the work that we do.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of acknowledging our identities and our culture, and also creating space for meaningful participation, or as you put it, procreation of solutions to the issues that affect us directly.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that separation between, kind of what we term social sciences and environmental sciences It's a recurring theme. And I actually came into this work of earth care as a social scientist. I used to, my interest was in development, human development, and what are the conditions that allow people to live a good quality of life? What does a good quality of life look like across different contexts and different cultures around the world? And the more I did work on that, the more I realized that you cannot have a good quality of life without having a healthy natural environment. But throughout my studies on, social development and international development, I didn't study the environment. It was only kind of through my work that I came across this. And then I started doing work on, the sustainable development goals and, policy advocacy around that. And then that's, the sustainable development goals kind of present that really holistic picture of what development looks like. It's social, it's environmental, and it's economic and political governance development. So, but I've also had similar experiences in the environmental space where I meet lots of environmental scientists, ecologists and climate scientists. And they say, we did 3, 4, 5 years, of study on, this particular wetland or this particular ocean. And we never studied the people who live there. We never were given tools to understand the different social dynamics that shape how these communities relate with that particular environment. And so I think going forward, especially when we're thinking about things like the sustainable development goals and how to achieve that and, how to ensure meaningful progress on climate justice, we really have to have cross disciplines coming together. We have to have different people with different expertise coming together to co-create solutions. And that's why partnership really matters. You can't have one person or one institution doing everything. It's actually the intersections of different groups of people coming together that presents a very holistic and more accurate picture of reality and our understanding of nature, of the environment, of humanity. And that's how we develop these solutions. So I'm really in support of having that, interdisciplinary approaches to studying and understanding the environment. I'm really support of more organizations and more academic institutions really embracing and honoring that in the way they think about designing studies. And I suspect maybe it's not like a global experience. Maybe it's, I don't want to be rude. Maybe it's a Western thing, a Western way of thinking, this compartmentalization of disciplines. Because when I think of, for example, indigenous communities, they have a much more holistic understanding of reality that brings together different aspects of study from, cosmology to actual kind of environmental sciences. So I don't know. I agree. I'm very passionate about it because, if we're to hold space for the rising generation of environmental leaders, it's not just about studying nature and climate. It's about studying people and bringing all of that together. And it's the same if we're to encourage, inspire the next generation of economists. It's important that they not just study, economics, but they study, environmental science. They study sociology, because all of that helps them to understand the role and the place of economics in today's society, right? So, yeah.
I'm with you, Marion. And you mentioned the 17 principles of environmental justice. So we'll be sure to place the link to that in the show notes.
For sure.
on the topic of environmental work and even climate work and gender, it's impossible to really do this work without encountering two important topics: intersectionality, which we touched on, and also justice. Often it could be a bit overwhelming because there's so much wrong with the world. There's so much injustice in almost every aspect of our lives.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I think we'll be more effective in any form of work that we're trying to do if we put on a justice lens, if we attempt to at least improve inclusivity and improve fairness, even by just having these conversations to get persons thinking from that angle in terms of fairness and equity and inclusion.
Mm-hmm.
To me, those are the pillars of sustainability. Those are the pillars of sustainable development and also climate resilience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just wanted to say I absolutely hear you. Intersectionality and justice are like the core pillars of when thinking about climate resilience going forward, environmental justice, nature conservation. Those are just two core pillars of whatever solution we develop. They have to really integrate those two elements. It's something that has definitely come up in Blac Earth Podcast when I'm interviewing different leaders. Intersectionality and justice are two issues that have come up as being critical to building, a future for our planet, where people and nature are really living in harmony and thriving together. And I would also say intersectionality is important for developing effective solutions. I think it's critical from a justice perspective, understanding people who in our world, in our communities are being disproportionately affected by changes in the world and changes in the environment. And I also think intersectionality is really important from an innovation perspective, like bringing new ideas. When you make room for new voices, you hear and you see things that you wouldn't see from your perspective, and that broadens the opportunities that you have to get things done and to get things done well. And that's one of at the beginning of our conversation, you asked me, what am I learning in my journey with Blac Earth Podcast, is really just the innovation and the power and the genius of intersectionality, of allowing people, we all have multiple intersecting identities that shape how we show up in the world. But when we can apply those perspectives and allow ourselves, room to be able to share those perspectives, it could really, it brings just newness and freshness to how we think about the issues that we're facing in the world, which are so complex, and so, they go on and on, basically. Every day is an effort to make progress on climate justice. So I want to acknowledge that intersectionality is key for, just and resilient futures, but I also think it's really exciting in terms of innovation, and allowing different perspectives to shape how we think about the world. So yeah.
Yes. We've touched on how issues of race and even gender and socioeconomic status intersect with environmental justice. We've acknowledged that Black communities continue to bear a disproportionate burden of environmental injustice, environmental pollution, and degradation. So in your experience, Marion, how can marginalized and underserved communities be more involved in shaping sustainable development initiatives that affect them? Are there any examples that you can share?
For sure. I have a different theory on people and communities who live at the margins. And I think that's informed by my experience of growing up in the UK. So I I have a huge amount of respect and love for the Caribbean diaspora in the UK, because they have played such a pivotal role in enabling civil rights in the UK for Black communities, but I would argue for everyone really. And I think just being able to understand kind of the Caribbean influence on British history and British kind of political development helped me see that the communities who were doing it at the time, they were very much in the margins of society, and they were really working and struggling for the right to, have their basic human rights to freedom, to safety, to equal opportunities for work, for healthcare, for housing. But they also dreamt up really beautiful visions of the world, that, have made Britain so much more, a better place, more equal, more richer, in terms of, culture. And so I often see margins as a space for new ideas to emerge, for new perspectives to emerge, new ideas, new visions of the future to emerge, because it's often people who are living in the margins that have to find ways, different ways of realizing, basic fundamental human needs of, equality, of freedom, of love, of belonging, of safety. And so for me, when I'm working with communities who are living at the margins, I don't see them as kind of victims. I see them as people with inherent strengths. So when I think of how do we engage and how do we support, communities at the margins to co-create or create sustainable development initiatives, I think one thing is to really create space for them to remember their agency, and their voice, and the fact that even if they are living in and having experiences of deprivation, there is a lot of strength inherent in their communities, which they can draw from to create their own visions of freedom or sustainable development. I also think a really core aspect of that, as putting on my social scientist hat, I think when a group of people can rebuild the social fabric of community, like real community, that unlocks so much potential. So, things like in a community, in a thriving community, you tend to have social networks. You tend to have a network of people who are really connected, who are really open to sharing information. There's an element of reciprocity there. There's trust. There's a sense of and a real opportunity for the people in that community to participate in decision making. They know and understand their rights. They know and understand the procedures and opportunities. So all of those things, like really, that's like the social fabric of a community. And when there is injustice in a place or deprivation, that fabric disintegrates. And so if I had the opportunity to support a community who's experiencing marginalization when it comes to, for example, environmental injustice or sustainable development, I would put a lot of my effort in helping that community rebuild that social fabric, rebuild trust, rebuild networks, rebuild a culture of reciprocity, strengthen their understanding and knowledge of their rights as citizens and what they can do and how they can participate to shape decisions that affect them. Because I think once you have the social fabric in a community, you then unlock the potential for the community to actually come together and develop things, develop things by themselves. And so, in a short summary of what I'm saying is for us by us, but to be able to have for us by us, you need to have a social fabric. And so some examples, I think well-known examples, I would, point to Wangari Maathai, who was an environmentalist from Kenya, and she started the Green Belt movement, which is working with women living in rural communities who are experiencing environmental degradation as a result of industrialized farming. She worked with them to help them build a sense of agency and community. And the Green Belt movement has now turned into this worldwide movement of, reforesting and replanting basically the world. And that all came from that understanding of, once you support a group of marginalized people to rebuild their sense of agency, to build a sense of community amongst themselves, there's literally nothing that they cannot do. And another experience I can share on a personal level, I have worked with a community in London who were basically working to resist the expansion of an airport because, the airport was so close to their homes, and it was just basically decimating their environment. And the community at first didn't really have a sense of agency because, trying to resist the building, or expansion of an airport, when you are living in a community that has very little resources, there are no job opportunities, there's a lot of crime, a lot of violence. As a result of that, to be able to come together to then, try to stop a national government from expanding, something in their interest can be very hard, right? But in working with that community and, organizing events, organizing spaces for them to come together to really think through what they wanted to do, to support them in defining a vision for, how they saw their community and what resisting that flight expansion, the airport expansion look like. Those kinds of events and activities may not have been directly to do with the environment, but actually it was about helping the community remember how much strength and how much opportunity and how much beauty there still is in their community. And that was worth the long-term struggle of working to resist the expansion of that airport that was having massive negative environmental impacts on their health and well-being. So I think, one thing that I very much advocate for as an environmentalist, if you want to really support a community, or you are part of a community who is experiencing marginalization, really working to rebuild the sense of community is key towards moving towards environmental justice. It doesn't take away from that work. It actually is the bedrock of, real long-term, sustainable, and I would say more equal outcomes for sustainable development. And then another thing I want to link to that, but it's to do with investing and finding supporters and allies of your community who can actually help to attract resources that will help you to sustain the work that you are doing. And linked to that, I was recently on a grant panel for a new climate justice fund in London that's supporting Black and Brown communities to develop climate, community, and health solutions in their neighborhoods. And I think it's really important when wanting to support communities, or wanting to also empower your own community to realize sustainable development, or to build that in your world. You need resources. You need real resources, and finding connections and finding people who can help to bring those resources in a sustainable way too, right? So not having funding that has lots of terms and conditions. I know Prime Minister Mia Mottley has been a really great advocate in bringing to light just how unjust climate financing is at the international level, but it also applies at the community level. Really enabling funding solutions for communities that enables them the freedom to do the type of work that they need to do to be able to realize sustainable development. And that may not always look like planting a tree, or cleaning a river. Sometimes that looks like having time off to rest. That may look like being able to buy books at the library. It may look like building a creche so that parents are able to then actually have time to come together to organize, as opposed to splitting their time between caregiving and organizing. So I believe funding unlocks many, many great things for communities experiencing marginalization. And that's something that I'm really passionate about trying to seed more of in the work that I do going forward, because I recognize that, like the way soil needs water, good ideas and thriving communities also need resources. And there's no way around that, especially when we're thinking about environmental and climate justice.
Wow. With every conversation I have on this podcast, I grew to love this work more and more. Marion, thank you for acknowledging the influence of the Caribbean diaspora on the civil rights movement in the UK. I see my Caribbean people as warriors at heart and resilient by nature, not as victims, as you said, but as people with inherent strength. And I agree with you that we can view margins as a space for new ideas to emerge. And from what you have said about rebuilding the social fabric, trust, networks, cultural reciprocity, I gather from that it's about empowerment.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a saying that you can't really empower someone, but really and truly it's about helping communities to find the power within them by, as you said, rebuilding the social fabric and that sense of community.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much to unpack. There's so much to think about, to reflect on. I think we could talk for another hour. But as we wrap up today's episode, I want to ask you, Marion, what would make the world a better place?
Wow. I'm going to say something which it has emerged a lot in my podcast. What would make the world a better place is remembering that we are nature. I think many of the drivers of the climate and environmental degradation, those drivers come from a core belief that we are separate from nature, we are better than nature, that nature is an object and not a living being. And I think the real transformation is when the human species, we remember that we are nature collectively. I think that would unlock a huge transformation in the world. So, yeah, I want to leave it at that. I could say more, but I'm going to leave it at that. What would make the world a better place is remembering that we are nature.
Well, that's definitely a mic drop moment. So, Marion, I want to thank you so much for joining me on the Climate Conscious podcast for such an inspiring conversation.
Thank you. No, I just wanted to say thank you for inviting me to be part of this conversation, and thank you for your leadership with the Climate Conscious podcast and the Caribbean Women Climate Justice Conference as well. It's so refreshing and exciting to listen to you and to learn from you. And so I'm just grateful for this platform. So thank you, Derval.
Thank you, Marion. So where can listeners connect with you and the Blac Earth Podcast?
You can connect with us on social media through Instagram, LinkedIn, and TikTok at Blac Earth Podcast. We are also on all kind of major streaming platforms for podcasts. So if you go on our website, blacearthpodcast.com, you can access all, the different platforms that we're currently streaming on. If you want to follow me personally, I'm on Instagram at earth.marion. I'm really looking forward to connecting with you. So thank you so much for your support and just keeping these really important and transformative conversations going and just supporting us. So I'm very grateful for that.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Climate Conscious Podcast. We'd love to hear from you. Let us know your thoughts on the show, or if there's any topic you'd like us to cover. Write to us at theclimateconscious@gmail.com or simply leave a review on your favorite app. Remember to follow The Climate Conscious on all social media platforms. See you next week.